Hello and welcome to JPzilla, and today we're going to be talking about Godzilla -1, because of course, what else is there to talk about really? Well, I mean, there's that Monarch show, but everyone wants to know -1. So we're going to be talking about -1. Now, first of all, I would like to offer a huge spoiler warning for this movie, and I mean huge, because I'm going to be talking about everything, and I do mean everything, even the ending. If you don't want any spoilers, click away now. If you don't want some spoilers, click away now. If you're okay with spoilers, or have already seen the movie, then please, enjoy the ride. Now, this video is going to be a little different, because I don't actually have a script for this one. I'm just talking. I wrote down a few of my thoughts, and I'll be going down that and elaborating, so I hope you enjoy. Now, first of all, what do I think of the movie? There is a lot to talk about, but overall, it was amazing. It really was. And the funny thing is it was actually the first movie to both make me hate Godzilla and make me like the characters and care about them more than Godzilla. I did not feel any compassion for Godzilla at all, and I actually thought that this movie was going to go in a bit of a different route. I thought they were going to make him more sympathetic, show you more of his side of the story, the agony he had to go through, and the pain of the atomic bomb. And you can tell that this is a creature that's not meant to exist. This is a creature that is not meant to exist. This is not the MonsterVerse Godzilla, where he's like some force of nature. He is something that can barely support itself, that was not created to be a part of the natural order. Now, maybe in the first scene, but after the atomic bomb, everything kind of starts falling apart for Godzilla. And you can tell that just by looking at his atomic blast, which, by the way, is probably the coolest atomic blast ever. I feel like before this, with the animes and Shin Godzilla, they started to overuse the little laser pointer, fire breath, but this one, it was bomb breath. And what I love about it the most, though, is how after he uses it, he is charred. He has cinders falling off of him, and it really shows that it is really painful for him to use this ability. In my mind, it's kind of like when Wolverine uses his claws in the X-Men movies, and he has to heal his knuckles afterwards, and it's kind of like that, you know? I'm sure it hurts every time for Godzilla too, and it just shows that this is not a creature meant to exist. It's kind of indicated that Godzilla in the MonsterVerse has been able to use his atomic blast for thousands of years, ever since he absorbed the Hollow Earth energy. I mean, his species did. But this is a creature that is basically just hanging on to life by the skin of his teeth. This is really the closest we have seen of Godzilla's Regenerator Gene 1. If you don't know what Regenerator G1 means, it was a concept introduced in Godzilla 2000, which explains how Godzilla is so invulnerable. Basically, every time he gets hit by something, he just regenerates so fast, it's negligible. And we really got a very close-up look at this when the protagonist, shot a landmine that was in Godzilla's mouth, and Godzilla's face actually exploded. Now, this is one of the rare films that actually has conventional weaponry actually affecting Godzilla to any degree. Now, of course, this doesn't really affect him externally, but apparently, if you aim on the inside, his mouth is a very vulnerable area, and that surprised me. I was surprised at how vulnerable Godzilla was, and yet how they still made him terrifying. But my point is that when Shikishima shot Godzilla's mouth, it actually exploded his face, but we saw it regenerate just like that, as if he was like Deadpool or Wolverine or something. And this is actually canonically accurate to other versions of Godzilla too, like Godzilla 2000. And we even saw it in the Godzilla comics, The Rulers of Earth, which is a very good comic series, by the way. I'd highly recommend it. But anyway, we do see this ability, but this is one of the first times we've seen it in action. Except that they did have it in GMK, where after Commander Tachibana basically exploded Godzilla from the inside, or made Godzilla explode himself, you know, all that was left of him was his heart. And his heart was still beating, and that was because of the Regenerator G1 cells working to keep him alive, even though he was basically dead. There wasn't any brain, there wasn't anything left except the heart, but the heart kept beating because he can't kill Godzilla. I mean, yeah, it's insane. He's so overpowered. But my point is, this is one of the rare times we've seen Regenerator G1 in action. And speaking of recurring Godzilla elements, this is the first time we have seen Godzillasaurus in live action since 1993, since the release of Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah. If you don't know what I'm talking about, Godzillasaurus is the base form of Godzilla. It's what he was before he got mutated. And we see this in Godzilla -1 when Godzilla, or Gojira, appears on Odo Island, which, by the way, I am very glad they included it in the movie. I wish we could have seen more of it, heard more about their legends, but there's only so much you can cram in the movie. I mean, it's completely understandable. But when Godzilla first appears on that island, he's in his Godzillasaurus form. He's still a dinosaur. He's still a regular-ish creature. And at this point, he can't breathe fire. He's not as tall as a skyscraper. He's still taller than the average theropod, the average meat-eating dinosaur, like a T-Rex. But he is nowhere near as big as he gets after the atomic bomb. I love seeing Godzillasaurus. I don't know. I just love seeing a more dinosaur-like Godzilla. And this may surprise you, but I even like Zilla's design as a Godzilla design. Zilla from the 1998 movie with Matthew Broderick, directed by Roland Emmerich. The Godzilla in that movie, quote-unquote Godzilla, is not really Godzilla, but I don't think that's because of his design as much as it is because how he behaves. He doesn't face the military. He runs away from the military. He doesn't destroy buildings intentionally. He just kind of accidentally crashes into them. And I feel like that's what truly took the Godzilla out of that version of Godzilla. But as for the design, I actually like the design. I like seeing the more dinosaur-looking Godzillas. So seeing Godzillasaurus was a real treat for me. Now, speaking about elements from some other movies, I want to talk about how this movie, in my opinion, has some similarities to other previous Godzilla movies. You can really tell that the director was a real Godzilla fan. I mean, just through and through, he knew Godzilla. He knows Godzilla, and he knows his stuff. And, I mean, all the elements he pulled from 1954 are pretty evident. How it took ingenious scientists to actually take down Godzilla. And one of the things I love is how they took down Godzilla and how it's based on real-world science of compression and decompression and surface tension and things like that. It was amazing, that whole sequence. But anyway, I want to talk about how it has similarities to GMK. First of all, one of the things I noticed straight off is that the mechanic who'd later fix up Shikishima's jet, his name, the name of the mechanic that is, was Tachibana. Now, for those of you who don't know, Tachibana was the name of the commander from GMK, Yuri's father, in that movie. And in that movie, he would take a submarine into Godzilla's mouth, into the inside of Godzilla, and drill through Godzilla, because apparently he's more vulnerable on the inside than the outside. And he created a hole in Godzilla's shoulder, so that when Godzilla tried to use his atomic breath again, he ended up exploding himself because the integrity of his structure was compromised or something like that. Now, I found that interesting, because Tachibana is the one who helps Shikishima do kind of the same thing, where he kind of goes inside Godzilla's mouth. Now, he doesn't go inside his stomach or take a submarine expedition into Godzilla, which is one of the craziest things about that movie. But it's very similar in that he uses Godzilla's weak point, which is the inside of Godzilla, and that was thanks to Tachibana, the mechanic, that is. Another little Easter egg is that after they bring Godzilla back up to the surface, and he's all damaged from being decompressed and, the difference in pressure, when he roars at the screen, he actually has white eyes, like pure white eyes. Like, he's been so damaged that he's actually blinded at this point. And I feel like that was a little Easter egg reference to Godzilla, Mothra, and King Ghidorah, All Monsters, All Out Attack, because Godzilla in that movie had white eyes because he was undead. He was repossessed by these angry, vengeful spirits and reanimated. And he had white eyes, and that was like the key feature of that version of Godzilla. So I feel like it was a little nod that the director had Godzilla blinded by the repressurization, and he had white eyes. And, of course, one of the biggest callbacks to GMK is the end scene. Because in GMK, there is an end scene where the camera zooms into Godzilla's heart, submerged in the water, and it starts beating again. Now, -1 does something very similar, where they zoom in on Godzilla's chunks, because that death scene was insane. So they zoom in on his chunks, and the chunks start regrowing, and it was very reminiscent of that part of GMK. Next I want to talk about is a little more recent, Shin Godzilla. Now, first of all, I want to talk about how the most intense scenes of -1 used a chorus-based score. Now, this is very, very reminiscent of Shin Godzilla, and even Shin Ultraman, which did the same thing, because it had the same composer. I think Godzilla -1 has a different composer, but Shin Ultraman and Shin Godzilla had the same one. And so, yeah, it felt very reminiscent of Shin Godzilla in that way. Also, cinematography, the way they show Godzilla's immense size, and the skill they did in showing his size was very Shin Godzilla-esque. And also some design similarities, like Godzilla has a lot of edges in this form, and I feel like that is reminiscent of Shin Godzilla, he looked very rough, and he had a large chest, like his chest was very prominent, and I know that's something similar with the Heisei era too, but I feel like Shin Godzilla and -1 have a little bit of a similar appearance. They both have a very big tail. But also, both movies show criticism of the Japanese government. Now, for two different reasons. -1 is because the Japanese government of the time put no value on human life. And Shin Godzilla's criticism is that there's too much red tape, there's too much process, nothing can ever get done. But they both show this kind of criticism of the Japanese government in that way. And I feel like that may have been inspired by Shin Godzilla. Now, I also want to talk about similarities it has to another movie, Godzilla Raids Again. Now, what's the similarity there? Well, the film is about a pilot who basically is about to sacrifice himself to save his friends from Godzilla. And in Godzilla Raids Again, one of the characters actually does sacrifice himself to help defeat Godzilla. Now, it wasn't quite intentional, but it was still a dangerous mission he was on. He knew he could die. He was in a plane, and they defeated Godzilla using planes in Godzilla Raids Again, very similar to how they used a plane to defeat Godzilla in -1. Another thing is that the protagonist's friends are all co-workers. And I feel like the co-workers were really fun, especially the Doctor. I love how he was able to figure out how to defeat Godzilla, and everyone kind of just realizes that this guy's smarter than they realize. So, it's also a bit more of a romantic movie, and Godzilla Raids Again had a bit of romantic interest as well, so I feel like there is definitely that inspiration as well. As I mentioned, it was the first film to actually make me hate Godzilla, and that is, I did not expect that, like I said, but wow, I mean, it's because it showed you the impact of Godzilla's actions. Godzilla's actions actually felt like they carried weight because they affected the main characters so viscerally. Like, I mean, all the mechanics dead because of Godzilla, and Noriko dead because of Godzilla. And yeah, it's like you see just how, and they don't show you Godzilla's. They don't show you how much in pain Godzilla is really. Godzilla doesn't seem to even experience pain, and that's something that's always interested me about Godzilla. Is like, this is a creature that's probably constantly in pain, and I'm sure -1 is. He just doesn't show it at all. He does. And they don't talk about how he's angry at humanity for using the atomic bomb, which is very surprising, actually. There's a line in the trailer that said he'll never forgive us, but I don't recall actually ever hearing that line in the movie, so maybe that was just the director Yamazaki throwing us all off. Like, no, they're not showing any sympathy for Godzilla in this movie. When he turns into chunks, you are cheering the humans on, and I feel like that was actually really awesome, that they were able to create such human characters that you could really root with, and the tension, all of it felt real. All of these characters felt like they could die at any moment in the movie. Literally any moment. And that is something I feel like American cinemas have lost, because, I mean, at this point, I wouldn't be surprised if they brought Uncle Ben back in the Marvel movies. No character stays dead in American cinema. I feel like Japanese cinema is probably different. Correct me if I'm wrong, I haven't watched that many Japanese movies, but I don't feel like they hold their punches if they can make a good story out of it. Now, they did keep Noriko alive. I was not expecting that, and that was just, I loved the happy ending. I loved that the character, first of all, didn't kill himself, that he was able to save himself at the end, and like, that's great. Like, I'm glad that it was a bit of a twist, like, they didn't kill anyone off, and like, wow, they actually kept everyone alive, and I feel like that was a very heartwarming message about the value of human life. And Godzilla against Mechagodzilla tried to have a similar message. I just don't feel like it worked quite as well. It came off a little more preachy than -1 did. Not to say that Godzilla against Mechagodzilla is a bad movie. I actually love that movie. I adore that movie. But -1 was just a little bit more effective in how it communicated that message, because it showed you real cinematic death, real fake death, I guess. And so, yeah, it was the way it delivered its message was superb. And I feel like American cinema could learn a lot from this movie, because it's lost a lot. It's afraid to kill any characters. It's afraid to show any. It's afraid to go too deep. I feel like too much of the American movies are just too superficial now. But anyway, enough about American movies. This is a Japanese film. As I mentioned before, I love the plan to kill Godzilla. It is probably the smartest plan to kill Godzilla in kaiju cinema. I mean, because it isn't just this oxygen destroyer, this convenient oxygen destroying weapon that appears out of nowhere and that couldn't possibly exist in real life. As far as I know, I mean, I feel like we know about it if some country developed it, using warfare, but whatever. That's not the point. The point is that clearly the producers of this film, the director and the writers, actually put some thought into how are we going to kill Godzilla, how can we make this scientific, and they didn't make Godzilla overpowered. That's one of the reasons it worked so well. He was actually vulnerable to conventional weaponry, and I loved seeing that. He wasn't a pushover like Zilla was, but it was just enough to make you see, like, okay, maybe they have a chance if they do things right, but also they don't really have a chance. If you get what I mean. I mean, I barely get what I mean. So, yeah. Also, this movie doesn't have a slow build-up, and that surprised me, because they show Godzilla in the second scene. I mean, very second. And I know it's Godzilla's source, so it's not the Godzilla we'll see later on, but I mean, even the original 1954 had a lot of build-up before they showed you Godzilla. Like, Godzilla didn't appear until halfway through the movie, in any form. And same way with, like, Godzilla 2014, and I can name a lot of others. But this movie did not have almost any build-up, but it didn't need it, because it executed the tension of the movie so well. Like, every moment felt tense. I mean, you never knew when Godzilla would show up again, and when things would go down. And when things went down, things actually went down. You saw people die in this movie, and it was very dark for a Godzilla movie. And I feel like that was a good thing, that they didn't hold back at all, and the emotions really rode high in this movie. I also want to talk about how the main character, Shikishima, actually experiences PTSD in this movie. And if I'm remembering right, this is the first Godzilla movie, maybe the first form of Godzilla media whatsoever, where a main character actually experiences post-traumatic stress disorder. At least that we get to see him deal with it and the effects of it. If it's not the first one to do it, I know Monarch does it a little bit, Monarch Legacy of Monsters, but that technically came out afterwards, so I'm just gonna count -1 as the first. And if it's not the first, then it's the one that did it the best, because it's really memorable, and it feels visceral. They don't hold anything back, and you just feel this character's agony, and the guilt, the survivor's guilt, that he's the one who survived when so many other people died, and he doesn't feel like he deserves to have survived. Now, of course, he's wrong. That's the whole point of the movie, is like the value of human life. But this is the struggle that this character's going through to really learn and appreciate that his life has meaning too, that he is actually someone that people like Noriko and Akiko rely on. And his hero's journey of coming to peace with himself and his survival is really the highlight of the movie and what drives this movie home. Now, let me see if anything else stuck out to me. Let me look at my notes. Oh yes, that scene. The scene where all the tugboats show up to help lift Godzilla out of the water. That was very reminiscent of The Rise of Skywalker to me. However, it was a lot better than that, because, I mean, it's a lot more realistic. I mean, how did all those ships, in, like, so many ships, how did they all get the message? How did they all decide to come to Exegol? And how did they actually all get to Exegol? I was watching someone talk about it, and pointing out how Kylo Ren needed a wayfinder, but all these guys just kind of show up. But anyway, it was reminiscent of that, but I feel like it was executed well. It was actually this really cool call to action scene, showing humanity band together to fight a common enemy. And in my opinion, it was almost Ultraman-esque, because Ultraman always has this uplifting message. And Ultraman always shows that humans really need to take care of their own problems, and Ultraman may be here, but he's here more of a support to help humans get back on their feet so that they can handle their own mess, so that they can band together against the monsters. And I feel like it was a very uplifting moment that fit in something like Ultraman. Just my nerd take on that scene. I guess it could also be compared to the movies, the Lord of the Rings movies, not the books, I think. Oh, I'm pretty sure this didn't happen in the books, but in the movies where Gandalf shows up with a bunch of Rohirrims to help the Rohirrim at Helm's Deep. And they all show up, the sun is shining, they charge down the hill gloriously, and I really appreciate that call to arms scene in a Godzilla movie. It just works so well. And I love how, for the first time, well, maybe not the first time, but in one of the few instances, the Japanese military actually has nothing to do with taking down Godzilla. It's all volunteers, and I don't know, it just feels a lot like you can connect to the characters more. They're not all just a bunch of soldiers. They're people who are risking their lives willingly. They're not following orders. They're doing this because they want to help Japan out. They're doing this because they want to make a difference. And I mean, wow, right? I wonder how many people would actually show up to fight Godzilla in real life. I mean, optimistically, it'd still be a lot, right? But you never know. Oh, and the last thing I want to talk about is how they made Godzilla much more of a horror movie type villain. And here's why. It's because he shows up out of nowhere. Like Jaws. He's like Jaws in this movie. He shows up out of nowhere. He actively puts the protagonist in real danger. Like, Godzilla's staring them in the face and actually chasing them down kind of danger. And he does this a couple times. He does this with Shima in the boat. He does this with Noriko with the train, which I love that sequence because it was very reminiscent of Godzilla the Ride, which is something else he directed, where it's just very like a cinematic adventure where you feel like you're there in that train being picked up by Godzilla. But anyway, he actually puts the characters in harm's way, and he's actually acting with a will. He knows full well what he's doing. He's hunting the characters down. He's acting with a vengeance. So yeah, he's much more of a horror movie villain, and in fact, his first appearance was very Jurassic Park-esque, which in itself is a horror movie. A lot of people forget it's more of a sci-fi movie, but it's also a little bit horror. And -1 is the same way. It's not a kid's movie. It's not the Monsterverse. It's not a kid's movie. Just be clear. Anyway, this has been my take on Godzilla -1. I hope you enjoyed the kind of podcast style, just unedited talk. And it's gone on a lot longer than I thought it was. I mean, when you get me started, I'll talk for an hour, but we don't have that kind of time. I mean, it's not like you got anywhere to go, but I'm sure you won't click on a 1-hour video. So yeah, if this goes well, I'm going to probably put out more videos like this where it's me just talking about what I want to talk about. No script, no filter. I'm just letting my thoughts flow. Even if this video doesn't do well, I'm probably going to do it because that's not my main motivation. My main motivation is to put out there what I want to put out there, and that's why I'm still doing the Design All Monsters series, even though almost no one watches it. For those of you who don't know, because you didn't watch it, Design All Monsters is this video series where I actually try to redesign every Toho Godzilla monster from the classic movies. So like Biollante was the last one I did, and I did Jet Jaguar, I did Monster X, I did Gabra even. I did Gabra, and that was very fun. So you should really check it out because I feel like I'm good at it. You should get some more recognition. So yeah, you go work on that. Until then, like, comment, share, and subscribe this video if you like Godzilla -1. And this has been JPZilla.